what I don't tell people often is that season ended. We didn't make like the NCAA tournament, so we're done end of October. Goes through November, December, January comes, and at that point, I really hadn't been training all that much. And my coach called me, and the USL Combine was happening in Charleston. It was happening on the weekend, and it was a Thursday. And he said, "Hey, a player just dropped out." They called me and asked if they could fill a spot. And he's like, "I feel like you could get picked up on a team with the USL if you just go to this Combine. It's a 2-day event." And I immediately, internally just sort of panicked. I was like, I don't think I'm ready. I haven't been training in 3 months. I immediately went to just the most negative headspace about it, of all the reasons why it wouldn't work out, instead of just saying, yeah, I'll go. No problem. I'd love to go play this weekend, I didn't go. And I always look back at that as that was kind of a career, a defining moment for me, because I really at that point made the decision that I wasn't going to pursue soccer at a really professional level.
Kylian Mbappe could have never played football if he grew up in the U.S., in my opinion.
Being from the States, you have to learn how things are over there, because MLS is much different than the Premier League, and you're almost stepping into a different realm.
With the 2026 World Cup coming here, and a new generation of fans start to become to discover the game, there's no telling where the game's going to be 10, 15, 20 years.
One game changed my life, and that's all it ever takes.
Today, as we normally are on Box to Box, I am joined by a very special guest here to tell stories that make the beautiful game more relatable to sports fans everywhere. And with this episode, again, no exception. I am joined by an individual who served as a youth academy coach for DC United. We'll talk about some of his experience there. Served as a former opposition analyst for the U.S. men's national team, a breadth of coaching experience. Today, he's aiming to be what I would categorize him as a disruptor in the soccer space. I think there's a lot to come from his new project, his new baby, Pathway. We'll talk about all the work he's doing there and just how he's feeling about the broader soccer space in general. Please welcome John Bello to Box to Box. John, how are you today, man?
I'm good, Jose. I appreciate you having me on, man. I'm excited for this.
Awesome. Good. I can't wait to really tell some of your story the best that we possibly can. And obviously you have no one, I don't think anybody really has a linear pathway into this space, right?
Right.
Pathway, for lack of a better word. But I think that, it's when you think about just how early on, how much we're in our infancy as an industry. I feel the work you've done already, the work you are doing is just going to serve as hopefully inspiration for anyone else who's looking to break away from whatever they're doing today and kind of be on a similar path. So let's talk about it. Before we jump into, your story, I think the question that we always ask on this show has to get answered, right? John, who are you today?
Yeah, maybe to understand who I am today a little bit, you have to know where I came from. So I'm one of 5 children. My father was an immigrant from Colombia, South America. He came to the United States when he was 14 years old, somewhere around that time period. Ended up in Wisconsin, of all places to go from Colombia, South America, and met my mom. So that's kind of where I was one of 5 kids, born and raised in the Milwaukee area in Wisconsin, relocated down to South Florida, which is really where my soccer journey sort of began around the age of 7. Nowadays, I am a father of 2 boys. I married one of my best friends from college that I met at school. So we've been married now over 10 years. And that's been awesome. So I'm a father, husband, and then professionally, I would say I'm probably a little bit of a mixed bag. I'm a coach, I'm an analyst, and now more recently, more of an entrepreneur. So I think that's kind of where I stand.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. I love this. I think you hit a lot of points there, right? I mean, we're all massive fans of the game, but we're serving the space in our own unique way. You're a family man. I didn't even realize you really kind of had as many siblings as you did. I didn't have that many coming up in a Hispanic family, so maybe I'm the anomaly. But I think it's, like I said, all the experience that I've been able to garner as preparing for this episode. I think that your story, like I said before, going to feel very, very relatable. But let's talk about it. Let's uncover it. I think you kind of already kicked it off from the beginning, and I do want to start there. I know a lot of the content you've put out around your journey has really pertained to your professional career. And that's what, because I think you have such a unique professional background. Everybody, of course, wants to dive in there.
Sure.
But I want to get a little more personal, as I typically do on this show. I think starting from the beginning and maybe just the earliest memories you have of this game. You grew up in a different era of soccer than I did. I'm curious. I really want to know, what was it like? I don't know, what was soccer like in this country at a time that you were discovering it? I did hear a pretty cool story about, how your dad kind of in a really weird way helped you break into this sport. So let's talk about it. I definitely want the audience to hear it from you. How did you discover this game? What was it like?
Yeah, I mean, growing up in Wisconsin, it wasn't the primary sport that I was involved with by any. I don't even know if I played it until I was 7 years old. It was I mean, a little, maybe here and there with my father, but it wasn't really like a thing that I did. I was more into American football because of Green Bay Packers and University of Wisconsin, and I was super into hockey, even though Milwaukee didn't have a professional hockey team. And then eventually, my dad took me to like a Milwaukee Wave game, which was like the indoor league back in the day. And that was when it was super popular. So that arena was popping when we went there. I remember that game almost like specifically because it was so memorable. But then no, it was we relocated to South Florida. Again, the story was that my dad signed me up for youth soccer as opposed to signing me up for flag football, which is what I really wanted to play. And then went out and absolutely just loved the game and fell in love with it and started playing it. So that was sort of the beginning portion of it. I didn't actually necessarily take a serious route in the sport until high school. I actually was a dual athlete. I played a lot of hockey growing up in South Florida. It's roller hockey. It's not ice hockey for the most part. So there's only a few ice rinks down there. So
as we can all imagine, it's Florida.
Yeah. So it was playing that. But I loved those two sports and eventually had to make a decision on which one I wanted to pursue more seriously. And soccer ended up being the one that I thought I had more long-term potential in and that I really just enjoyed doing. So that was the one ultimately that I ended up sort of going.
Do you ever I don't know, do you ever reminisce and look back and just think, man, what if, but the first question I have is, did your dad do that intentionally? And secondly, had it panned out the way you wanted it to pan out as a child, as a 7-year-old, do you think you would have stuck it out in the American football route? Do you ever just think on the impact that one decision could have had?
For sure. I mean, you got to remember too, like my older brother, we moved in this neighborhood. He played, there was a neighborhood kid who recruited my brother to play on his team, and they played in this league in Sarasota, Florida. And I went to every one of my brother's practices. And at the end, when they would do conditioning, running or 6 inches, that was like the old school way of doing core workouts, was just raise your legs off the ground for as long as possible.
Planks, yeah.
Yeah. I would do it with them. I knew all their plays. I was obsessed with it. I loved it. And going and playing in soccer, that was a totally different route than I thought I would have gone. I mean, I look back at it, I probably would have, I think I probably would have phased out of it eventually. I think I would have really enjoyed maybe the early portion of it, but then when it would have got to the more serious levels and the physicality of the whole thing, I probably wouldn't have been well suited to play that sport at that age. So I was a bit of a late developer, so it would have probably been tough for me. So soccer ended up being a really nice space for me. And then I was actually quite intrigued by, I never really knew, I think that the first time I really fell in love with the game was just figuring out that I could manipulate a ball to do something that I really wanted it to do and have control over that and do it with your feet, which I thought was super cool. And that kind of eye-foot coordination, I kind of had a little bit naturally. And so that was why I really took to the game. I just thought it was so cool. And then when you see the guys who are doing things, there's some really awesome ad campaigns when I first started playing back in the day, like the 98 World Cup, the Brazil team in the airport, the Scorpion in the early 2000s that they were doing, the secret games for the Nike cleats and things like that. I mean, we didn't have a lot of access to stuff. So when I would get to see it, man, it was so cool. And you would see guys doing tricks in the commercials that I wish I could just pause and rewind the TV to watch it because it happened too quick. And now the kids these days don't even understand how much access they have to that stuff. But I would have to wait and pray that the commercial came on again so I could see the same skill and then I could try to recreate it. It was I don't know, it was just different. You had to have an imagination to play the game,
You're man, it's crazy. Hearing you talk about this, it's, as someone who I feel for me and for those who listened to Box to Box before, they've heard parts of this story, but I was kind of brought into it. My parents were diehards from the beginning, right? So I didn't really, I watched the game being played before I ever got a chance to, like you said, manipulate a ball, have control over it. And again, it's one of those sports where it's the only sport, in my opinion, where the skill gap is so wide because you don't use the part of your body that you most readily use for just about everything, like you do with every other sport, right? Your hands.
Sure.
Use your feet, and that the skill gap that's created there just made soccer so interesting. But I never got a chance to see, at least as far as I can remember, right? I'm sure my dad probably had me with a small ball when I was a baby or whatever, and just as I was walking, trying to get me to play. But
Yeah.
I never played, to my recollection, before like watching the game, and so you got a chance to actually see what that was like. Soccer was slightly accessible to you at that time, right? I remember those times, to an extent. Like, I mean, you couldn't really watch big European matches. Much of what's available today on television or on streaming platforms just did not exist. And I remember going to the Cotton Bowl in '98 and watching the Dallas Burn play, and that was kind of my measuring stick. We talk about accessibility and how that impacted you. I mean, American football was right there. You were already a big fan of it. You were watching it every day. Your brother was playing. Do you not feel like that always kind of being in your face in a state like Wisconsin? I'm very aware of how the Midwest is with American football,
Yeah.
and how accessible that is. I'm just surprised that didn't have more of an impact on you.
Yeah, I mean, I still remained a fan, and I think even I had the itch in high school to try freshman football, just to try it, just to
Yeah.
say that I was able to do it. But I mean, I couldn't work it out with my schedules that I had going on with soccer and then with hockey then at the time too. So it just didn't make sense. But I still had that itch to try it, just to say I did it, because I never played flag football, never played tackle football. But I've loved watching the game ever since I was a young kid. So that's always stuck with me. I'm a huge fan of the game, but not something that I was able ever to try, which kind of sad thinking about it. But at the end of the day, I think it worked out the way it should.
Oh yeah. I think it's safe to say it definitely worked out. It's almost hard to imagine, right, what your life would be like otherwise. But I think it's crazy how some of those like one-off decisions just take you down a path and a rabbit hole that you weren't ready for in the best way possible. For our younger viewers and listeners, I'm really trying to paint a picture for them in terms of what life was like when you were trying to become better and not just, again, be intrigued by soccer. You're already in at this point. You want to develop a skill set. Most kids today go to YouTube, try to learn how to juggle, learn how to control the ball, manipulate it. How did you even think about doing those things? How accessible was this game? And were there any sort of sources of motivation, players, teams, anybody in between?
Yeah, I mean, well, first off is growing up back then, you had to just, like I said, you had to have a lot of creativity. It was just, you take a ball and you go outside and you were just like, all right, well, what can I do with this thing? And you just start kind of juggling it. I mean, naturally, I think the one guy who probably had a big influence on that was that at the back of like these Eurosport magazines, which was the thing back in the day that was not soccer.com, which it is now. But back then, it's like you get a magazine once a month and you look through it and you're like, these are awesome cleats. And it's like a whole process to order them.
The good old days, man.
But we had like, the VHS tapes at the end. And I remember my dad got a Pele one. It was like Pele's Skills or something like that. And it was just like him doing different stuff with the ball. And I would just try to emulate that. I would go outside and I would just try to do that, And then I started trying to count how many times I would juggle and get to, and try to break records and try how many with my left, how many with my right. You just sort of you create different patterns, and you become like a little bit more cognizant of what you're trying to achieve versus just like go outside and juggle the ball like for as long as you possibly can, because eventually that just gets boring, by the way. Like it's just this hard. So then make it more challenging. Try to juggle, keep the ball up, and walk down to the end of the street and walk back to the house. Like stuff like that. Like, can you do that? Those were just signs of like, once you got better at those things, of growth, of control. It almost became like a muscle memory or a reflex that when I got to like a real training session or something, it was so much easier. Like my technique was just good. I could control balls with both feet. I could play with both feet. I could pass with both feet. A lot of that just had to do with me being with the ball and doing things with the ball and being creative. So until skills and tricks didn't really come out until like Nike Freestyle kind of came out, I would say early 2000. And I think they launched like a website or something, but I know they had commercials and you would see these things and they were just like guys who were from Europe that were in the streets balling, but were doing different skills and around the world and all sorts of stuff. And man, I'd never seen that before. I didn't even think that you could do that with the ball. So then it was like a whole new unlock. It was like, man, start to try to learn to do those things, and figure out the steps to learn how to do them, because you can't do them right away. They're really hard to figure out.
Exactly. Yeah. Even just getting the movements down.
Yeah. Just get those down, get the coordination down. And then it was, all right, well then I would be like, well, can I apply this in a real training environment? So we would go to like we go to training and we do like a 1v1 or something like that. And I would try something just ridiculous. But then when it would work, man, it was awesome. That was awesome. But that's what I
Yeah.
mean. Like the creativity would just sort of come out kind of naturally. That was just fun, man. I think nowadays it's like it's very driven by videos and things like that you see, training apps, all sorts of stuff like that. I'm like, man, we just went out and played back in the day. And if I
Mhm.
really wanted to try to like get better against competing against other players, a buddy of mine, we would go to a park and we'd bring a few bucks and we would challenge kids to 2-on-2 and we'd just play for money. Like, I don't think kids do that anymore, but that's what we would do because kids were out there. We just walk up and say, yo, what up? Let's play. So it was just a different life. I don't think kids are doing that these days anymore, but that's how we got things done back then.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they are. Who knows, right? I mean, I know as recently as like I remember watching the '06 World Cup in Chicago, and like as soon as the matches were done for the day, whatever group day we were talking about, we go to this basketball court like down the road, and there was always like this. We lived in a pretty, I would say, pretty Polish dominant neighborhood in Chicago, and yeah, they were always out there. No one used the basketball courts for basketball. It was always for it was always for soccer.
Yep.
And yeah, we just go out there. We knew games were going on, and yeah, kind of a similar story there. But it's crazy when you look at the differences night and day. You know, decades later, and everything is so Project Mbappe-esque. You know what I mean in terms of like how players and even kids and parents included think about developing. It's not, you know, like I think our generation kind of picked it up because it seemed interesting and creative and a cool activity to do, and it just became a sport that we loved.
Mm,
Versus now, where I think the goal, even from a very young age, is to reach the heights that some of these players globally
sure.
are attaining, right? So, and a lot of that has to do with, you know, what's happening at home. I firmly believe football or soccer starts at home. Your parents had to have played a massive role in this to an extent, right? Your development and just what you wanted to achieve as you kind of moved through your adolescent years and got closer and closer to college, where, I mean, for those who followed your career at all, right, you wouldn't play D1 soccer. We'll talk about that. But I'm personally very curious. You know, I had a certain type of relationship with my dad who, you know, was helping me navigate, you know, my own skill set and helping me develop. What was that like with your parents? How involved were they from the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, you got to remember, I was one of 5 children, so my dad had 5 different, um, you know, 2 sons, or sorry, 3 sons, 2 daughters, trying to figure out how to make that all work on the weekends. His favorite sport is soccer, and I was the only one out of the 5 who really gravitated towards the sport. So naturally, I probably got more attention than all of my siblings from him specifically around the sport. My mom was very supportive of everybody kind of doing their thing, but we all did different things. That was the beauty about being a big family, is that we each were uniquely skilled in like really, really different things, right? So, my parents, they did a great job, I think, of supporting each of those things and trying to set up put us in the right environment to be able to do that, for as best they could. So, but my father and I, we had a very close relationship around the sport. Probably one that, if you've known you growing up with like a Hispanic father, when you get in the car after the game and he gets to speak about how the game really went, things of that
Yeah.
nature, like stuff like that, where, you get to a point where he coached me, I think, till 12 or 13. And then there was a point where it was like, he couldn't coach me anymore. It was like, it
Yeah.
wasn't meshing. I needed somebody else to really be the next layer of development for me. And he did a great job getting me to the point that I got to. So it was, I think, and ultimately then throughout the rest of my career, they supported me in everything that I've done, even as I gone into coaching. So it's been excellent from that standpoint. I probably couldn't have asked for better support, but yeah, that could have been also at the expense of time spent with my other siblings, which I'm very well aware of. So I think it's it's, as a father, that's probably hard to make decisions to do such things,
Yeah. No, when I heard you say that, it resonated with me so well, simply because I I mean, I having a Mexican dad, a Hispanic father, just like you, I think it's one of those scenarios, and I don't know if it's culturally the same across, our people per se, but I had a relationship, I feel like, very similar, where it got to a point where all we would really talk about in a detailed manner was soccer. That was really kind of it. My performances, whatever it may have been. It got to a point where I feel like I was trying my hardest to simply just to get his approval over how I played. And that's all I was really searching for. I would get into a car maybe after a game, and I didn't really have to say anything. He didn't have to say anything. We kind of just would start diving into the constructive criticism, and over time, that ended up being a lot of the motivation for what I was going out into the matches to do and how I wanted to play. And I don't know. Do you feel like that was maybe the similar case with you and your dad? Do you feel like when you were getting to a point where you're like, hey, I need another coach just because I don't want our relationship to strain any more than it maybe already has? I don't know. I feel like there's something here with elite level athletes. And I would consider you that. Division One. In fact, I think the numbers are less than 10% of any and all high school soccer players will go on to play college ball, much less Division One, right? That's a
Sure.
smaller subset. So I consider those athletes to be elite. And in my opinion, elite level athletes tend to have, somewhat of these interesting relationships and paradigms with their parents and how they developed and how far they were pushed to really be as great as they are. Do you feel like that is pretty spot on with your case as well, or maybe you had a slightly different path?
It's similar. I mean, you got to remember, he probably took me he was my coach from 7 years old all the way through probably like U13. So a pretty decent chunk of time. But each time I sort of kind of moved up a little bit of levels from like recreational to like Division 3 or Division 2. I never really moved beyond to like an elite level till the high school year because I was still playing other sports and I wasn't taking it as seriously as probably a lot of young children do today. So I wasn't specializing in sports by any means. I was still doing a lot of other stuff. And then it's kudos to my dad though, for like, he really leaned into like, if I played hockey, he learned the rules of hockey and he figured that out. If my brother played American football, he learned the rules of football. Like, he was very supportive, like in that sense. It just got to the point as a young man who needed a push to go to an more elite level. He probably was not in the place to bring me to that level. Like, it needed to be somebody else. It needed to be a new voice. And that was probably the perfect time for that to happen. Because naturally you're like, it's harder to go from like the at-home dynamic of like, he's my dad, I'm his son, to then the on-field dynamic of he's my coach, I'm the player on the team. And it's a tricky one. You know what I mean? Because you're getting criticism in both places. You're getting like, you got to do this at home. You got to do chores. You got to do this. And then here it's like, he holds you to a super high standard, which I totally understand. And I get that. But I didn't necessarily want to hear it from him at that point. So
that's fair. Yeah, no, that's fair. And I give like a lot of props and kudos to you and someone like even like my little brother who like, because he coached both of us for a while, and then like probably around the same age, like right before high school, middle school, I just decided I can't do this anymore. Like, I just need to go in a new direction. My younger brother stayed with my dad as his coach until the end of high school, into college. And so I think every player, every kid is different, but I feel like I've heard that type of story, not decently often, and I think it does say something about how the relationship between an elite level athlete and playing multiple sports. I think would have been something very interesting, because I've just been soccer my whole life. I played American football a little bit here and there, but I think it's fantastic to see that your dad was as involved as he possibly could be. And I imagine the moment he let the reins go from a coaching perspective, I don't know, I imagine things just maybe took a turn positively within the house, and maybe when you started then specializing in soccer in high school, it's kind of exactly what you needed, right?
Yeah, it wasn't like, I mean, I guess nowadays and age, there's a lot of parents put up a lot of resources around players if they feel like the kid is special, to like kind of get them to an elite level. I mean, financially, I don't know if we were really there to be able to do that, nor that was really the belief of my family that they should be investing so much money into my like development, right? So but I did play I played at IMG Academy. We definitely were paying some money to go there. I was definitely probably on scholarship. That's between my dad and them, but I knew I had to do certain chores around IMG, like, clean up the clubhouse and things like that, or get there early and take water out. Like, there were things I had to do, and I'm sure it was because of that. But I think at the end of the day, yeah, it was a great experience overall in that high school year, but it was the right time. Just what it comes back to me. It was just the right time.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think, and recognizing that, now in hindsight, of course, it's easy to kind of piece it all together mentally, but yeah, I think there's something really there for parents and for aspiring players to really kind of hang their hat on. So let's fast forward a little bit, right? You decided to then, of course, adopt soccer, which I'm really curious as to why maybe you pick soccer over hockey. Maybe you saw more potential long term. I'm not really sure. We can touch on that. But as you navigated high school and started approaching the opportunity of maybe being a collegiate student athlete and what that could present, why you decided to choose the College of Charleston, just kind of walk us through some of that process and what was important to you as a 16, 17, 18-year-old kid.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the decision between hockey and soccer was actually probably more driven from a financial and logistics standpoint than anything. In Florida, there's only so many hockey rinks, and I moved from roller hockey because that doesn't have really any at the time. That was a youth sport, full. There was no college hockey going on at the roller level, so it was like I need to play a sport probably that has the potential to like help me get through the college season or college aspect. So pivoting to soccer probably made the most sense at that time from a long-term perspective and also a cost perspective. So that was it. And then as I went through the high school years, I probably started to realize how good I was around my like freshman, sophomore year. Like, man, I actually have some potential here that I could actually play at a high level. But I was pretty naive. I mean, I didn't know what the level was, like across the board in college soccer, I didn't really know. And at the time, all I knew was that to get into MLS as it existed, you had to go through the draft pretty much. There was really no other mechanism from a youth academy standpoint to kind of get into a pro environment. So college was the path if you wanted to go that route. And that's pretty much what I wanted to do. Again, the whole college thing, I think kids do a way better job with this nowadays. I didn't do almost any research on any college that I had gotten information from. So we Nike Friendlies was like a big tournament that they started back in the early 2000s. We held the inaugural one at IMG Academies actually. And after that one, I think we had, I must have had like 5 or 6 different coaches reaching out to me. I had Wake Forest, UConn, like big schools were coming after me and saying like, hey, you're a good player. Like, and I was like, whoa, this is different. But I didn't really, I was probably one of the first ones at that time to kind of go, I was the only one in my family to go through a recruiting process. Let's just put it that way. Right.
Yeah.
So I didn't know what to do. Do I respond to these guys? Do I not respond to them? Do I just pick up the phone and call them? I ended up actually not really doing anything. I just sat on it and thought, well, they'll see me play again. And then someone will make me an offer to go to school. And that was probably a big mistake because I think if I would have contacted those people back, expressed my interest, done my research on the schools, and said, hey, I would really love to go to Wake Forest and figure out a way to make this work, I bet you they would have put more time and attention to coming to see me play again. But I didn't do that. So that was on me. It's my fault. So I actually got to my senior year and I still hadn't really made a decision on where I was going. I had a full ride offer from Stetson University just outside of Orlando, which is a small business school, probably like 2,000 kids or 3,000 kids. So of course that looks like that's a great offer, right? Full ride, you can go there. And then I really only had College of Charleston, which kind of came late to the game actually, because they were recruiting another player on my team and they had some extra money available. So they came and offered me a spot. I didn't even know Charleston, where it existed on a map. I couldn't have told you where it was. So I got on a plane, not knowing where I was going, landed in this amazing place. And I was like, what is this? And started to experience what life might be like in Charleston. The only thing I really cared about was that it had 3 beaches because I grew up near Siesta Key Beach in Sarasota, Florida. So I was like, this feels like home. I like this, So
yeah, that's crazy. I mean, like to hear, honestly, it's so surprising to hear that in a good way, right? But to hear that you were probably just as unprepared for the recruitment process as so many of us, even today in this day and age of 2024, right? I can't tell you how many parents I've talked to that they feel like the recruitment process is a full-time job all by itself, like just understanding like where to go, the research to do, how to approach coaches, how often to email them before a camp or a tournament or whatever the case may be. And how to keep that pipeline full, right? To make sure that you have every option available to you when it comes time to make a decision. But nobody ever, kind of presented you with a process for how to do those things as an 18-year-old kid. No. Did you not feel overwhelmed? Did you not seek out maybe some assistance or guidance at school, at your local high school, or whatever the case may be?
Yeah, my head coach at high school was really helpful in the process, Derek Harrington. And then the head coach that I had at IMG Academies, Tom Durkin, at the time was helpful. He'd pick up the phone. Both those guys would advocate for me till the death, which was like, that was probably the biggest like godsend for me in terms of even getting to College of Charleston, because Tom picked up the phone and called the head coach here and was like, you need to bring this kid, and here are the reasons why, right? So, I really leaned on them to try to help me get over the finish line. And my parents had never gone through the process before, so really had no idea how to support me or what to do. And me never being through it, I didn't really know who to ask besides going to them, which is why I was like, I'll just rely on my performances and that'll be enough. So it was a very naive on my part, but I look back on it and I'm grateful the way that it turned out. And I had people who were advocating on my behalf that were in my corner. And that's the biggest reason why I got to where I was.
Yeah. So I imagine if you weren't thinking about where you wanted to go to school until maybe like senior year, you probably also weren't thinking about what you wanted to major in.
Oh no, I had no idea. I think it was, I just really at some point in high school was like, I think I'm gonna try to play soccer the rest of my life. I don't know how that's gonna work out, but I'm just gonna do it.
Yeah.
My first step was to get into a college, and
Yeah.
and I really didn't know what my ceiling was. So I think it was try to figure that out as a first priority. And I get to school. I like that it was a liberal arts school, so I could kind of explore some different things and then kind of figure out a track that I wanted to go on, as opposed to Stetson was a business school. I knew I kind of really at the time wasn't interested in that and didn't want to go down that track. So that it made more sense to me, I think, to pick the College Charleston. Was more open, and I think the other thing that I was really interested in was an experience away from my hometown.
Hmm.
And it wasn't to get away from my family or anything like that. I missed them to the death. It was more of just like seeing what my boundary is, like how far could I go away from home and still feel comfortable and create a life and all that stuff. So I moved away when I was 18. I don't think I ever moved. I moved back maybe for a short time spell after college, like 3 months, and then ever since then I've been gone. So uh, it was a really good experiment for me to figure that piece out of my life. It pushed me into a lot of different ways that I didn't recognize at the time it was doing, but over like reflecting back on it, for sure, it was a massive importance for me to go do something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I firmly believe that, and you don't have to. I'm not saying that in order to be successful long term, you need to have those experiences, not necessarily abroad, but just outside of your comfort zone. But I do believe that you won't really ever know what you're fully capable of until you're forced to be in an environment where there's so many unknowns and you kind of just have to figure things out. You create your ceiling to an extent. I feel like as a player, as a human, I think that's just true. But going back to, when I asked about your major, because I think you had no foresight into what this would unlock, I think, for you as a career.
Yeah.
I'm not sure as a player if anybody ever thinks about if any player ever thinks about whether or not they're going to coach after their career is done. I think some may approach that idea as they near the finish line, but it doesn't necessarily pop up when when you're in the prime of your career or prime of your youth and you're thinking about where you're going to play next. I don't think anybody ever just pivots over to coaching, but it looks like everything just came together and culminated very, very well. You're a kinesiology and kinesiology and exercise science major, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a decision sort of made after my sophomore year of where do I want to looking at everything that was available in terms of majors. I was like, what do I really want to do? That was the real first time probably I had to sit down and actually give some thought to post college of like, where am I going to be if soccer doesn't work out? What am I going to have as an educational backbone to then pivot into a career? So exercise science, I realized how genuinely interested I was in the human body on a lot of different levels: energy systems development, the musculoskeletal system, the nervous system, all these things. I'm like, man, I just want to learn about that. I wasn't that good at chemistry or biology. That was a little bit of a part of it, but I didn't have to take advanced courses in those. I was more like the human body is my jam. That's really what I kind of want to learn about. I'm big into fitness. So I was like, maybe down the road, I could pair that into something with that. I didn't really know where it would lead to. But I think it was a really good decision on my part. And then in that experience inside my department, I had very good mentors as people who were on the staff there as teachers or professors. So some really good ones. One who was a coach at the Citadel, which is another college in Charleston itself. One who was very into sort of like supplementation and doing background research on supplements. So that was another one I was really curious on. And then another one of the professors was actually a local soccer coach who would invite me out to go to training sessions with him. So that's actually probably where I ended up getting my first exposure to the sport. And we would talk about how all things that we're doing in class actually relate back to what's going on a soccer field. And I was like, wow, that's cool. So I think that all together, I think it never I didn't really think too much post college, but all those experiences, if you bring them together, definitely tie into kind of where I've gone in each of like my paths.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, like I know you mentioned like chemistry and a couple other things that you felt like you weren't great at. I still think anatomy and physiology has to be the most difficult of all of them, at least in my opinion. And
Yeah,
you made that your life. I think it's awesome. Kudos to you. I couldn't endure it, but I don't think that I had the chops for the human body the way that you do in performance and how every aspect is impacted throughout the body. I tried to take A&P and it was just it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare. But
I don't know if I did well in it, but I was very interested in it. So at least I studied.
yeah, 100%, 100%. With that class, you absolutely have to. But yeah, I think it's so interesting that you started there. Okay, like you decide after probably, I imagine, being undecided for a year or two, you lean into kinesiology and exercise science, and then it comes time to you fast forward. From what I've heard, you're playing soccer all 4 years. You captain your side 3 of them. You get to a point of like graduation, right? And then you got to go out into the real world, figure out how you're going to do this thing, and you land at an insurance company.
Yeah.
What was the process like there? Was that just maybe like a low hanging fruit opportunity just to get your feet wet in the real world, or I don't know. I don't want to speculate here. What was that process like?
I think one thing that's actually you touched on it, but we don't really talk about it all that much, is preparing players for the conversation of what happens post playing career.
Mhm.
It's like because as soon as that last game's done and you don't have training at all the next week, it's like it is the weirdest feeling in the world because you have no idea. Like it's the thing you've been doing since you were 14 years old that now all of a sudden I don't have training. What do I do? Like what am I doing now? That was my identity. That's where I was at. So post playing, I was really kind of lost trying to just figure out what do I do next. So I picked up some odd jobs. I still say to this day, one of the coolest jobs I had was actually being a rickshaw driver or bike taxi in downtown Charleston throughout the last couple of years of my college, just because the stories are great. You got to stay in shape. You could eat whatever you wanted to eat. You got to know a lot of people, which was pretty cool. But
Awesome.
I would do that. I just did that as like a filler. I was like, I'll just do this for a year. I'll travel a little bit, take some time. But what I don't tell people often is that I had a phone call. So season ended. We didn't make like the NCAA tournament, so we're done end of October. Goes through November, December, January comes, and at that point I really hadn't been training all that much. And my coach called me, and the USL Combine was happening in Charleston, and it was happening on the weekend, and it was a Thursday. And he said, "Hey, a player just dropped out." They called me and asked if they could fill a spot. And he's like, "I feel like you could get picked up on a team with the USL if you just go to this combine. It's a 2-day event." And I immediately, like, internally just sort of panicked. I was like, I don't think I'm ready. I've been training in 3 months. Like, I immediately went to just like the most negative headspace about it, of all the reasons why it wouldn't work out, instead of just saying, yeah, I'll go. Like, no problem. I'd love to go play this weekend, And I didn't go. And I always look back at that as like, that was kind of a career, like a defining moment for me, because I really at that point made the decision that I wasn't going to pursue soccer at a really professional level. And after that, it was, I tried actually again to pick it up. It only lasted like 6 weeks. It was like a summer PDL where I realized I was just, 5 steps behind everybody else. And it was going to take a long time for me to climb back up. I was 23 years old. Where was I really going with the sport? So a buddy of mine actually was launching or opening up his own State Farm agency in Bethesda, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C. So again, another big move decision to leave Sarasota, Florida, and go somewhere I've never been to before, put myself in a brand new environment and try something different. I think I looked at that job. I look back and reflecting on the time period. I looked at the job as a job, not really a career. My buddy who started it was younger than me at the time, actually opening up his first business, and was looking at it more like a career, actually. Of like, man, I want to get to a certain point with this thing. I have a big vision for this. I want to grow. I was like, I don't like selling insurance. So really that was like my mentality at the time, as it's not soccer. So anyways, if I go past that, like that was kind of where you start to talk about the decision of when I would pivot out of insurance, because I did it for about almost 2 years, and I was on a track to either have my own agency or be long-term with my buddy who still does it to this day. And he's actually been quite successful. He has 3 offices now. So it would have been a big project long-term had I stayed with him.
Yeah.
But I was like, there's something kind of missing in my life. I wasn't really sure what that was. I kept thinking back to, I spent so much time doing something throughout my life playing the sport and dedicating my whole life to it, it would kind of be crazy for me not to pursue it at a professional level. If I wasn't a player, I could do it as a coach, is basically what I decided.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like, all right, I have to make the decision to pivot and start that journey.
Yeah, and I want to go back to just before we go into the coaching journey that you started, which I still think is insane. And again, I think it's going to prove what we touched on at the very beginning of the show, which is that no one's path to being where you want to be career wise is linear. I think there's a million different ways you could do it, but with how much I've heard you say that you wanted to make soccer your life, whether that's a player, coach, whatever the case may be, that you wanted to do that. You said it yourself. I feel like you would have just jumped normally at the opportunity to get into that USL combine, start, forging that career for yourself, even if your fitness wasn't where it was supposed to be going in. I mean, do you think you just had lost your touch to a point where it wouldn't have made sense? Did you feel like a sense of people throw around the word imposter syndrome all the time? I don't know if that's a real thing per se, but I'm just curious. I felt a little bit of that even in my own kind of career leading up to this point and what I'm doing with GOLZtv. But I think with the USL Combine, that's a massive opportunity to quickly jump into the professional scene. What were you feeling that made you feel hesitant?
I think I was feeling that I was going to get embarrassed. I felt like I would be the worst player out there because I hadn't been keeping up with playing, with being out there. But the reality was I probably wouldn't have been. I was a very good player. I was very tactically flexible. I could work myself into a lot of different roles. Yeah, I might have been unfit, but I just didn't see that. And I didn't really even have anybody to bounce that off of, so to speak. Like I just decided kind of on my own in a moment that I wasn't going to do it, which was unlike me, I think, considering some of the decisions that I had made at that point. So for whatever reason, just where I was at in life with a lot of kind of uncertainty about like what's going to happen next, I didn't have a lot of confidence. So I was sort of just like, this isn't going to work out like immediately, which is not the way I typically operate. So I think it was uncommon. I look back on that, I'm like, man, that was uncharacteristic of me for sure. But in that moment of when that question came, that's how I answered it.
Yeah. I think back then too, right? I think USL at that point in time was, I mean, a massive opportunity for collegiate players or former collegiate players, just because of where the league is now in comparison to what it was back then. But yeah, I feel like that would have been, just based on what I've heard you say, I feel like, back then John would have just jumped at the opportunity, right? Easily. But it did lead you, not taking that opportunity, did lead you and put you on a path to where you are today, which I still think is nothing you can really scoff at looking from the outside in. So we touched on it already. You decided after almost 2 years to pivot out of this industry that you were getting to know, that you already decently experienced in. 2 years, even if they're early on in your career, is still pretty comfortable, right? It's still like you have already gotten used to the industry. You know what to expect. No major scares, right, for the most part. But I've heard you say before, you felt like something was missing. Just go a little bit deeper on that and the motivation for why you wanted to break away from this and start volunteering as a part-time coach.
Yeah, I think that there was just a connection of human connection of like being around other people. I think was something that was missing for me, like the team environment. I mean, again, that was just something that I was so used to doing and I look forward to so much every single day. And then when it wasn't a part of my life, that was hard. And I started playing men's league soccer in Washington, D.C. I got a little bit of a taste of that. And I was like, man, I love this. My wife was like, you should start volunteering and just go out and just see what that life is like. And maybe it fills a void for you, or maybe it's something you want to do long term. If I didn't actually really know when I started doing it that you could really make a career out of it. So it was very much like that kind of feeling of the human connection. I could get that to some degree through the insurance agency, but it was a little bit transactional, right? You're providing a service for something that is a required necessity. So people call you, they have to talk to you, so to speak, or at least that's how we operated. So there were elements of it that I really liked, especially if I would build up rapport with a client. But I really was missing that, like the interaction with players on a field around something that I love, moving in a direction that we're all trying to go to the same way. I really missed that. So that was why I sort of started to make the pivot. And then the first time I saw or when started volunteering, experiencing what it would be like to be out on a field with these players, I was drawn in almost immediately. Like, man, it's amazing. And it was a new area of the country. and Washington D.C. is like highly known for like that sort of area. Washington D.C., Baltimore, Philly, New York. The players up in that region are incredible. There's such like a melting pot of players, but it's amazing. The quality that exists up there actually is so condensed. And so I would just be around high level players and see that, and I was so impressed. I knew that was something that I wanted to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And just out of curiosity, how much time, when you say part-time volunteer, just people get a sense of this, right? And if you want to start breaking into an industry on your own, you probably do have to do some of this work just extra on the side to get the experience you need to take on a role when the opportunity does pop up. How much time were you committing on, let's say, a weekly basis?
Yeah, I mean, I started just on the weekends, and they would
Okay.
do the camps and training programs with DC United at the time were kind of like Saturday, Sunday gigs. So I just started with like, I'll commit to one day. It's a 3-hour block. It was a drive. It was an hour, 45 minutes each direction. So it was
Oh, wow.
it was a long chunk of a day actually to get out to where I needed to get to go do these sessions and be a part of it. And then I started to kind of commit to more than one on the weekend. I would do like a Saturday, Sunday type thing. And then I would ask to go out to the actual academy sessions and watch them train, but they don't train till the evenings. So it was 7, 8 p.m. at night going out to shadow sessions and just be a part of it. So overall, I just ended up like, it was probably a 7-month period, 6 to 7-month period of just volunteering my time like that, just to get around and be around other coaches. And then that eventually led them to like, let's let John run passing today in the camp. You know what I mean? Let's let John do this today, or technical skills training in the camp. And they put some responsibility on me, and they gave me an opportunity to actually try it out and get out there. So it was a safe space to do it with camps and training programs. The academy stuff, I was just shadowing, wasn't allowed to do anything, which makes sense. Those are the real teams.
Yep.
And then that led to my first real paid opportunity with the club, which was coaching 10 weeks of summer camp, or whatever that was, 8 weeks of summer camp. And that really then helped me kind of develop my coaching voice and developing some skill sets that I needed, which then led to an opportunity that sort of came out of the blue for the head coach of the U13 pre-academy team at the time, that they needed to fill a void. And I had been around for a long time at that point. I've been around for close to 10 months. So they just knew who I was, and they knew my skill sets. They knew what I was good at, not good at. And yeah, it just made a lot of sense. They didn't have to do an interview process. They just asked if I wanted to do it, and I stepped right in.
That's awesome. And like you stepped right into what I would consider to be, even if you're there 10 months, it's still less than a year, and you're jumping into a role where you're coaching what, 50 kids, right? Probably.
It was a pre-academy team, which meant that like at the time, the U.S. Development Academy was like U14, U16, U18. And so the 13s, the team that I took over, were a feeder team into the academy team. So they put 2 pools of players together essentially that I oversaw, and we would train together with an assistant coach and myself. So it was basically 48 kids working.
Wow. Do you ever think back, like just hearing you say that, right? Because it's again, the point I'm driving at is it can feel intimidating if you're not the most experienced player out there. These or person out there. These players are looking to you for guidance, direction, just tactical instruction. What we're going to do today, they're looking to improve, as I'm sure we both know, right? The parents in this country as well are also equally looking for their kids to improve when they bring them to these sessions. So there's a little bit of weights that maybe could hang over a new coach's head with that role. And I think back to the story we just told regarding the USL Combine, and your decision to just go ahead and bypass that opportunity because of how you felt, the lack of confidence you may have had in that scenario. Did any of those feelings come back when this new opportunity presented itself?
Yeah, I think naturally you probably think I'm stepping into like the big boy leagues a little bit here, and I'm going to be around the big boys more consistently. So it was definitely like I'm not sure if like I can do this, but I'm just going to lean into it. And I had enough confidence because I've been getting enough reps at it that whole summer leading up to that moment. So I knew kind of what the standard was for coaching. I'd seen enough youth sessions where I kind of felt like I could go design a session, I could go execute one at a high level. And I had really developed my voice. Like I had learned to like, I don't know, bring energy to a session and control a session, or like, it's just like, there's something about that, where you're in control of the training session because you're the master of it, right? You designed it, you're executing it, you're giving the instructions. I got good at my delivery, or I was improving in my delivery. So I did feel confident enough to step into that environment. The new challenge was there was a different level of player. So I was moving up in levels in terms of players. So they had higher expectations of who you are as a coach. So you kind of have to deal with that. They want more communication. Had to learn how to do that. You're dealing with parents then who are, raising high-level youth players who have a lot of potential. They want feedback. Like, there's a lot of elements that kind of came with that probably I wasn't prepared for, that I took head on, but nothing really is going to prepare you for that. And I think you got to just have to accept that and go into it with a really good mindset.
Yeah, and an open mindset, right? Because again, you have to pivot on the fly. You have to solve problems that you probably haven't solved yet, but that can be exciting. If your mindset is sort of tailored to feel that way going in, right? Just be excited for the challenge, and whatever happens in the best way possible. It sounds like you learned, right? You probably learned, whether you realize it or not, from that USL combine opportunity, and just not wanting to maybe have those feelings attached to another key decision in your career, right?
Yeah, that probably just that USL decision left a bit of a what if in my mind that I always sort of regretted to some degree. And so I always kind of felt like, man, if I got another chance somehow, some way, I'd just lean into it and just never say no.
Yeah, that's a massive message for players. And let's talk about those players that you were coaching a little bit, because I think now that we're into the coaching aspect of this, I'm personally very curious. I imagine others are as well, because there is this I've always felt that I'm not a coach for a number of reasons. But I've always felt like I've never maybe been patient enough, or didn't want to deal with certain aspects of coaching. I maybe could be an analyst at some point. We'll see. But I think if we want to paint a very realistic picture for what this life is like, and what any person who maybe is looking at this sport and wants to break into it from that perspective can expect, I think I want to touch on with the youth that you're coaching and what you're looking for. I don't know. How do you think about developing those players I think I've heard you say you were a U13 coach. You then became a U15 coach. That scaled up into some of the work that you were doing as an analyst with the national team. That's a very kind of scalable path to look at. The ages kind of level up one at a time from there. But when you're coaching pre-academy players, or players within a development academy, it's a very high level setting. How do you think about, how am I going to get the best out of them? What's the measure of success? What would be considered successful when you're looking at 40 to 50 players?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like you have different segments of a youth player's developmental life cycle, right? And it's like you start young, it's like the technical skill development, love of the game. And then as they get older, they start to grow more tactically, socially, things of that nature. And I was dealing with an age category where it was primarily like 8th graders moving into 9th grade when I first started. And those kids are all over the place in terms of physical development, physical like maturity, what they're into, things of that nature. Especially if you get the difference between a 9th grader and an 8th grader, one in a high school environment, one in a middle school environment still. So it was very challenging to learn that side of it, how you help develop like the psychosocial aspect of a player. That's a big one. But a lot of it really was just about the environment that you create, and making sure that there's a standard of training that is enforced and that the players all agree to, and that we hold each other accountable for that. So it was about like really creating the right environment, and also kind of having them be a part of determining what that is and what that looks like. And then therefore it just sort of like it's a wheel. It just keeps like everybody's helping move this thing. Everyone's a spoke and moving the wheel around. Like it keeps moving. So that was really like the achievement for success, because you think about training 48 players. I mean, we were, to be fair, really strapped for resources when I came at the academy. We weren't the most funded. We had one field at RFK, at the complex there outside of RFK Stadium. It was a turf field. I would say the turf field was probably only usable for 3/4 of the field until we got a new field. Field was in really poor condition in parts of it because it was old. So you couldn't really play on it, so to speak. So a lot of the stuff that you were doing was different skills exercises, passing exercises, possession exercises, games where you could. And when you got the good side of the field, man, you could open things up and you could do more things. So it was really just trying to put or execute a really high level environment, make sure the standards were there every single time. That's a lot of times what success looked like when I was trying to work with that amount of players. When we built up to like the U15 level, we had the field replaced. I could work with the players more and larger tactical scales, because if you think about it, it's actually really interesting. I would talk to these players and ask them how they preferred to learn. And we would do a lot of split group training. We would do a lot of things that were maybe unit-based training, like back line, things like that. But a lot of like the really players that probably ended up signing homegrowns, especially that I had talked to, they liked learning things at that age in the large scale, 11v11. And there's actually not a lot of coaches that like coach. Like a lot of people don't coach in 11v11. They'll coach in smaller settings and then they'll play a game at the end where there's less coaching. These guys wanted detail in 11v11. And I was like, oh, yeah. So it was really fascinating. So I would have to adjust a lot of the training that I would do, in particular on Thursdays, because that's when I did get a full field. It was the only time of the week I got a full field. And that day and how I structured it was so important for like the long-term development of the players in that group.
Mhm.
It wasn't enough contact time with the players. And that was just, we just didn't have the capacity to do it with field space and time. I actually trained that last year I coached with the U15 team. I trained them 3 times a week. It was crazy.
Wow.
It was Monday, Thursday, and Friday. There was a 72-hour break between Monday and Thursday when I trained these guys. And that was insane. I was like, how am I supposed to make progress, right? Which actually, it was a blessing in disguise, because it actually forced me to lean into other methods of accelerating learning that I wasn't considering, like video analysis and how I did meetings with the players, with the team, and with like units. Like I really leaned into that as supplemental to trying to figure out a way to get contact time with the guys. So, and that group had Kevin Paredes, who's now U.S. Men's National Team Young Player of the Year. It had Moses Nyman, who's at Minnesota. It had Jacob Green. It had Jeremy Gray. Like, dude, the team was stacked. I mean, they needed attention. And I had to figure out other ways to get it done. So it just it forced us to be adaptable, which I credit that environment to. But was it ideal for what we were trying to get done? Maybe not at the time. You know, it's changed a lot since then, and they have much more resources in fields. But back then, it was just the academy system was just getting going.
Circumstances of the times. But I think, just hearing that some of the names that you kind of mentioned there as far as players go, you've seen some special players come through, and that's another, like, I don't want to call it an obstacle, but another layer, right, to you being a coach in that environment and creating a suitable environment for these players to really thrive and reach their potential. As you notice, more special talent coming through, because every coach does, right? In this pool of 40 plus players, almost 50 players, everyone's at a certain level, which is why they're there. But there are, the cream of the crop that rises to the top, right? And when you identify those talents, what adjustments do you have to make sure that they get the attention and the development they need, that may, that they're, with those needs being slightly different than the majority of the bunch?
It's tough. It's a really hard question to answer, because everybody's circumstance as a starting point is so different. You could take Moses Nyman as an example. His mother was an immigrant from Africa. His father was still back in Africa. She worked 2 jobs just to make ends meet. He was a young player at 14 years old who was essentially caring for his younger brother. So he was like forced into maturity super early in his life. Like, and other guys had more normal lifestyles, like growing up. So it's just different, because you kind of have to meet the player where he's at and understand, have empathy for that before you start. Like, it's not just the training field, is my point. If you think about the total time in a week and the amount of actual contact time you have with the player, and then shrink that down into the amount of time you actually are communicating with a single player, your impact is a very small percentage. So you have to make your like the interactions that you have to be extremely meaningful. And then you also have to just be cognizant of everything else that's going on in their life, because long-term is the goal, not short-term winning the U14 national championship, right? That doesn't really matter. So it's more about that long-term thing. So you got to kind of meet with the kids where they're at and help them really start to establish high-level habits early in their life, because that's where they really need feedback on, is like the pros. When you look at the guys who have been there for 10 years plus in MLS, I mean, these guys, they operate a certain kind of way. They're there for a reason. It was very strategic. And getting players at a young age to learn that you should start to live with some intentionality in terms of how you want to develop, not just put it on me, that it's on me that you develop. It's not just me. It's also very much you. There's a lot going on there. It's just a matter of doing all that. So it's really, like I said, a difficult question to answer. But like when I had the contact time with the players, that's why I tried to make it so high level and consistent. They knew what to expect to some degree. And I think that, and like a really high level of communication with them, is something that players really, really appreciate. Consistent feedback and a high level of clarity and communication, and where they stand and what their role is.
Yeah, and just so we can go a little bit deeper on just the how to live highly intentional. It doesn't have to be nitty gritty, but if you had to have I don't know, a short list of habits that that most of the top level players, let's say in MLS, embody through and through, is there just a set of you know uh, traits that they have or practices they're putting in place, or just again, how are these folks living intentional, and how can players start doing some of that?
Yeah, I think it falls into a lot of like the intentionality of like simple things that are totally controllable in their life: food, diet, sleep, like the body care habits that these guys instilled probably at earlier ages than other people. It's
Mhm.
massively important. And those are things as a coach you have almost no control over. So it is like that will like I think a lot of players don't realize that, and they get to a certain age and it really starts to hit them hard that they don't have that habit down. They haven't nailed it, and they're trying to play catch up, and it's difficult. It's hard. So the
Yeah,
earlier you can start to do some of those things, nailing your off-season workouts as an example, making progress when no one's watching. Like it's these small things. And then, we took it for granted growing up, but just like you're like getting comfortable with the ball was something we did for fun. It's like maybe it's probably more feels like a workout for a player these days, just the way in which the state of soccer kind of is. But it's like a I don't know. Like they should just do it because it's fun. And like
yeah.
sometimes I feel like it's a workout. It's scored on an app. You get whatever. It's different. So yeah, all those things kind of together. I feel like players could look at all the buckets of development that are kind of around you and areas that you could make incremental growth and change, and that you are in control of per se. Those are
Yeah.
things that you should start to pay attention to.
I agree wholeheartedly, specifically when it comes to I mean, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I had or any elite player that I grew up playing around had, that was taking care of everything when it comes to like self body care and thinking about longevity or even the grades at school, whatever the case may be, to make sure that wasn't an obstacle. But I think what I can confidently say is most of the best players in talent that I grew up around, family included, the one thing that they always did was they're always with the ball, right? They are always working on something. Like you said, it was fun. It was an opportunity to be creative. But I think we also saw team training sessions as the final piece, not the primary vehicle for which we were going to get better, right? It was
Yeah.
team sessions were almost like supplemental. It was going to help us put everything we're working on our own together in a way that makes sense in a team-based environment. But you were getting better at home usually. And that's kind of how I've always felt. I'm not sure if you see eye to eye there.
No, I do. I mean, I would ever since a young age, I've worn out shoes just being outside juggling balls for days. I mean, I still think I owe my dad a garage and a window in the front of his house just from the stuff I did. So it was very much like I never viewed it though as work. It's all I wanted to do was I would get home and I'd be like, I just want to go outside, and I would beg my older brother to come play with me.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter what sport. I just wanted to be outside playing a sport. So I just always looked at it as fun. But
Yeah.
nowadays, yeah, it's a little bit different. There's kids are very scheduled. Like that's okay. I understand that, but it's travel soccer is a beast in itself. But it's just a little bit of a different life.
It is 100%. And I think, that whole aspect of pulling back the layers of how in depth, youth training goes today and everything that parents and families are kind of put through on that front. We'll save that conversation for a different day. But I think it's interesting when parents think about what can my child do to give themselves the best opportunities and chances to be successful within this sport. I think we've unpacked a lot of that here. Let's transition into really quickly just the U.S. men's national team stint. Because you're on this path, you're obviously growing, you're scaling, you're getting better at what you do, you're feeling much more comfortable. Did this challenge kind of present itself out of nowhere? What were the conversations like at leading up to you accepting a role with the U.S. men's national team? And as we talked about already, as in different segments throughout this show today, you've felt pressure in some form or fashion and dealt with it pretty well in every aspect of your life up to this point. But a position with the U.S. Soccer Federation and the men's national team specifically has to feel like its own type of pressure, no?
Yeah, for sure. I think I got there from, well, actually, if you go back to 2018, I actually decided to leave DC United Academy for a couple of different reasons, both personal and professionally, right? And I leaned in more to like performance analysis at that time period and started building my own company, my first company that I was trying to build, which was called District Sports Consulting. and I wasn't really sure what it was going to be, but I ended up working a lot with players off field and on field, specifically in more individualized setting. And I at the time, I just looked around and said, well, everyone has individual trainers for technical skills. Why can't they have an individual trainer for positional tactics and things of that nature? Like, and everybody was recording games, and I had a large interest in it. So I just sort of pivoted naturally and started building up a business around that. And I built up a pretty robust client book. And then along the way, started doing other things that I was interested in, like a podcast, or going out and doing coaching development with local youth clubs, doing presentations at local youth clubs. I was doing tactical presentations with youth players and holding like workshops on different systems of play and things of that nature. Like, I was really trying to get out and coach in different ways, but not on field. And then the national team thing came sort of by chance, with the timing of when they had lost Josh Wolf as an assistant coach. He had went to Austin FC, or had just signed. And the assistant coach at the time, BJ Callahan, was calling around asking for, throughout his network, of like different names of people they should consider. They weren't really sure what type of profile they were looking to bring in for the position to fill Josh, because they weren't going to bring in another assistant coach. They wanted to bring more of an analyst in to sort of build out a department for that, to support opposition analysis and performance analysis. So that kind of came about really randomly through a mutual connection. I was put in touch with BJ. We had a few conversations. I submitted some work, and then I went through a bit more of a formal interview process with them, and that's sort of how it came about. It was very much my starting point was good. I had a solid foundation, and I had different skill sets that they could immediately see where I would add value into the environment that Greg was creating with the team. And so that was it. And so from there, it was like, all right, I can do this. I just got to go see what it's like, actually. And then when you get there, yeah, it's a totally different beast when you go from working with a U16, 17 player to then the next day I'm getting introduced to Weston McKennie and Christian Pulisic and all Tim Ream and these guys. And I got to talk in front of these guys. Like, it's different. There's a different pressure there. And some of that is self-imposed, I think. Like, they are awesome people, awesome guys. Very much care for the work that you're doing for them and appreciate the work that you're doing for them. That's what I would say about that. So some of it is pressure that you're sort of putting on yourself, that doesn't really exist actually. And that's just because you're going into such a high level environment where the stakes are greater.
Yeah. No, I agree wholeheartedly. I think, we do that to ourselves so often, right? But it sounds like as your story throughout your life has continued to move forward, you've approached that conundrum in a slightly better way every single time. And so for those who aren't aware of how a position like that with an entity as big as the U.S. men's national team works, you accepted a role. It's normally just a contract role for a specific time period, correct?
Yep. Or at least I was at the time, because they were in COVID. They were looking through somebody through the end of the 2022 World Cup cycle to fill this void. So it was about a 2-year deal, essentially, that I signed.
Gotcha. And so just so we understand what an opposition analyst is, what you're supposed to do, just describe the function of your role.
My primary responsibility was just to collect all insights on any team that we were going to play in international competition, and break that into what I would call digestible pieces of information that were then presented or served a number of different functions. So the first would be like match planning with the staff, actually just digesting, okay, this is who they are, this is what they're about, these are the strengths, these are the weaknesses, how could we expose these things, what phases of play could we win, developing the match plan, things like that, in case we needed to make adaptations to what we were doing. So that's a primary function. That would then serve team training, essentially, because in a team training, you're like a lot of times when you're setting up activities, you're controlling the opponent's behavior to mimic the behavior of the team that we're going to face so that we could get real repetitions at the match plan. So that serves that function. I worked with the performance team because they have to build the back end, like the performance, like planning of like, hey, okay, here's the physical load that we want to hit on this day. We want to hit these number of, I don't know, high potential sprints or high intensity runs, things of that nature. But they would build all that stuff in mind with kind of like what they could expect in the match. And part of what they could expect in the match is from me, hey, John, what's this team like? High press team, low press team? Will we like, you kind of start to figure out like what kind of actions we may be able to expect from a physical standpoint or a load standpoint. And they sort of predict in their little back end calculations. And then that goes into session planning and how we determine the length of bouts and the size of grids and all that stuff, and the topics for the day. So it really go into them. And then the last bit was then I would digest that information that we would discuss at like at the coaching level down into a team presentation that I would deliver to the team itself, and then also player reports on the individual players of each individual player on the opponent that was then delivered to the players as well pre-match, so that they could study their direct opponents or substitutions that they may see, things of that nature. So yeah, it's a lot of work and it goes across a lot of different departments, but it was a really fascinating role to be a part of, to be involved in all that.
Yeah, I mean, I just hearing you talk about it, I could feel the energy. I could tell you had it was a challenge that you were ultimately ready for, and it sounds like you performed at a high level pretty well. So the role itself was this 2-year contract because of the circumstances. Did you want to continue to own that role for the U.S. men's national team moving forward, or where did the segue between that role and you? I don't want to say starting Pathway, because I know there's a little bit of a gap there, but
Yeah.
being on the path, I should say, towards entrepreneurship.
Well, I already had a taste of entrepreneurship from 2018 to 2021, early 2021, and I had done well with it. So I was, for the first time in my life, very much in control of my schedule and built my personal life around my work schedule, not the other way around.
Yep.
And going into the national team setting, I quickly realized that is very much it's a very demanding environment, as it should be, right? It's the top, like, it's just the lifestyle, and I had to really make a decision if that's what I wanted my life to be. Now, national team life is different than club team life. That's an important distinction, I think, to make, because the club team life is a daily grind, right? The nice thing about international soccer was there's really intense time periods away. You come home, you can sort of like take a little bit of a rest. You still high workload, but you're at home. And that was the nice thing, is I could really be present when I was here. So there were parts of it that I really liked, that I could say I could continue to do this long term. And there were parts of it where we were gone, like the really extended periods of time, like the 30-day trips, the 40-day trips. Those were brutal for me, because when I started the gig, I had a 2-month-old son. And then he was growing. I was missing a lot of the milestones that he was hitting. And that hurt me a little bit, because I had just came from this life where I was in total control of my schedule. I think that's really important to make that distinction. So I had already had in my mind, probably pre-World Cup, that I wouldn't continue with the team, simply because I wanted to revert back to a lifestyle where I was more in control of everything.
Yeah, no, I think that's massively important. I feel like it's not talked about enough either. With, being an entrepreneur. Don't get me wrong; it is probably I don't even know what's more difficult, right? Being on a path to professional soccer and all the work that it really takes to kind of get to that level, or deciding to go out on your own, kind of release yourself from those golden handcuffs, as I call them, right? And create a layer of independence that most people have never experienced prior to kind of leaning into entrepreneurship in some form or fashion. But it's like you do have, even if you are working longer hours, like, you just have the ability to piece your day-to-day life together however you'd like to. And that, to me, is the ultimate benefit of deciding to go out on your own. You've tasted that already. I kind of want to just better understand your thought process, because I think from what I've heard previously, you got a chance to work with Austin FC prior to actually founding the company of Pathway. And, you have some great co-founders there. I'd love for you to touch on them and, kind of how you guys thought of this idea for the company itself. But you saw the industry, you saw how young it is, technically speaking, and how much opportunity there's for things to improve. But what really opened your eyes to not continuing with the consulting that you were already doing, but leveling your entrepreneurship up into something more?
Yeah, I think, well, I guess a couple of things. One is the transition post World Cup was difficult, though, because the intensity of the work leading up to the World Cup and then through the World Cup almost gave you no time to think about what was going to happen next. And to some degree, I was betting that, I mean, you're looking at like a rocket ship, right? It's like, man, this thing is I joined the national team in the first place because it's on a launch pad. It's ready to go to the moon, man. Like, it's awesome. And I want to get on the ride. And if you go to the moon, I'm like, man, your life could change, basically. So
Yep.
you sort of bet a little bit going into the tournament that you're going to crush it. And then you get out of that tournament and a whole new world of opportunities are open up to you because you guys excelled. So it was very much like I wasn't sure I wanted to see how the tournament went, and then I got out, and then it just hits you in the face. Then it's like, okay, what do you do next, type thing. And my wife's like, "What are we doing here?" That's like it's a constant feeling. So I knew though that I could fall back on kind of the experience I had as an early entrepreneur and from 2018 2021 and rebuild something like District Sports Consulting. If I really wanted to do that, I wanted to try something a little bit different when I got out of the World Cup, and that's kind of where uh, one of my partners now, Nolan Sheldon, he had reached out and asked if he wanted to jump on this project with him and start a company that we call Per 90. We were working primarily with Austin FC from the January time period through the end of the summer, kind of like the end of Leagues Cup or around that time period. We were primarily focused, or we're trying to create essentially a new service that kind of didn't exist to help fill some holes within coaching staffs in MLS, because they're a little bit short-staffed to some degree in certain places. But we wanted to offer kind of 3 services that would be supplemental or one step removed from the actual environment of being involved in the day-to-day grind of being on a professional coaching staff, and really support and serve a head coach. But we were trying to set it up to do remotely. That business idea had a lot of benefits, I think, from that project. We pitched to a lot of different clubs and had some decent traction, but nothing really ever materialized. So it ended up being a project that kind of wasn't really going to work out, and we kind of knew that to some degree. And we were kind of thinking about where do we go next? And at that same time period of when all that was going on, because we were working with Austin already, they had an analyst leave their club, assistant analyst or second analyst leave the club to go to a different MLS club right in the middle of that like 3-week grind leading up to Leagues Cup, where they're playing like Saturday, Wednesday every week. Yep. So they had zero time to do like a hiring process, and they needed somebody to help fill a void. So like rather quickly. Okay. So we were in a position to hop in and just help out. And that's what we did. So we came on board to just help them go through a recruitment process to hire a new analyst. My partner and I, Nolan, we showed up and we basically like just looked at all the applications that came in, and we're like, so what do you do here? You just go through every resume and just like pick people to interview kind of thing.
This is hundreds of applications.
I mean, I think for that specific position, we had probably close to 220, 230 applications. And that's probably on the lower side if you think about some positions in MLS. We've heard marketing departments have 600 applications.
Yeah, no, I believe it, especially for a club like Austin FC, right? Where you're tapping into, let's say, Austin as a town, for those who aren't familiar, just UT being there, the tech hub it's become over time. I imagine Austin FC has a spot, a role open in any kind of department. There's going to be a lot of attraction to it.
Yes, very much so. And I quickly really realized throughout the process that if you looked at probably the bucket of candidates, there were a lot that were really qualified in terms of skill sets and experience, right? But I was like, well, how do these people stand out from each other when I'm looking at their piece of paper here that's there, and how do we go through this? So, to be fair, like we didn't really have a great process to start, but we just tried and we started to work through it, and we got through a lot of it, and we did first round interviews, and we've started to really realize, man, this process is interesting. There were certain candidates that we could immediately tell, like, this will work out. Like, we could move this candidate forward. There were others that were like almost right away, this isn't going to work out. And, that kind of was interesting just because we were well positioned from our experiences to know if an analyst was going to come in and interact with a coaching staff, what does that person need to have from a personality standpoint just to survive in the room itself? Like, it's a demanding room. There's a lot of big personalities in the room. You need to have opinion. You need to articulate your thoughts clearly and communicate really well. It's like, if I wasn't picking up those signals in the first 4 minutes of a conversation from somebody, then I was like, okay, we can move on from this. But the hard part was we couldn't figure that out until we got them on the phone. So we went through the whole process actually, and doing technical round interviews and then presenting final candidates to the coaching staff, who then did further interviews. And they ended up hiring an amazing analyst out of Portugal. And he just killed the whole process. He was an amazing guy. But there were also, in that process, we had identified probably 10 to 12 other candidates who we felt were very strong, probably 4 others that we thought were really strong. They just didn't necessarily meet the criteria that the head coach was looking for. But I knew other coaches will probably be interested in someone like this profile or this profile. So that really got us thinking about the whole space of hiring. Like, man, how does this go down everywhere. How's everybody doing this? What's the play that they run when they need to hire a new analyst or a new director of social or whatever? So we started to just investigate, and that's where we really uncovered, man, there's probably been a play that's been run the same way for 20 years.
Yeah.
And it's kind of ripe for disruption to some degree. And that's what we started to become really interested in, going down the path of how we figure out kind of how to move into the space and help facilitate better connections between talented job seekers and employers.
It's crazy how you could just uncover, right? A niche problem becomes a massively bigger problem with testing and just trying to understand how do we benefit not just one but many. And I'm willing to bet you probably didn't even realize that this was somewhat of an ongoing issue, that no one was able to successfully facilitate strong connections between talented individuals and the clubs who have certain roles open that are difficult to fill because of the skill set required, right? Like there needs to be a kind of a facilitator in the middle. And you guys uncovered it just through a test with Austin FC. So how does that become, okay, cool. Kyle, let's figure out how we get this up and running. Like, how do we make this not just a project that we're testing everything through, but legitimately a company that is garnering community, a company that has content flowing on consistently multiple times on a weekly basis. You guys do a lot for those who aren't already in tune with what Pathway is and who you are. How do you scale to that point?
Yeah, it was a process. I mean, we did like a big meetup. We just did a deep dive on ideas and a lot of whiteboard stuff, which is probably some people's nightmare, but we did that for like 3 days straight. And just like, okay, like what is this thing? What could it potentially be? What's the biggest version of it? What's it not? I mean, we just didn't know. A lot of it was like, okay, we need to have some ideas and go talk to people and really figure out on the employer side, what's their processes like? What are their pain points? Hear them out, right? If they had a service that they wish existed, what would it be? And then the same thing on the job seeker side. It's going like, what's the experience of them trying to get a job somewhere? What happens when they put their resume out there? What feedback do they get from the interview process? Like, you just start to piece all these things together and you're like, okay, there's a really big opportunity here that's actually niche specific to soccer, because there's sports job boards out there for sure. Teamwork Online is the biggest one. They are all sports though. There's nothing that's very niche down into soccer specifically. So we were like, all right, I think there's a space here for us. Now it was, what do we do first? That's the question, right? And we went back on this for a while. We were actually down the pathway of doing a job board first, I think, for a long time. Like, we thought that was going to be the thing, and just being a direct competitor to Teamwork Online. We ultimately ended up tabling that idea for different reasons, because we weren't necessarily convinced that was where we would get a lot of traction. We actually felt that building community and adding value to that community and continuing to grow that community would actually then help us create a feedback wheel of, hey, this is what we're looking for. This is what we're looking for. Here's what I'd love if you guys did this. I'd love if you guys did this. So it sort of drive the development of the next thing. And then the other thing that you can do really well with it is you can test. You can be really adaptable, and you can test at a very low risk, in a very low risk kind of way, through polls or like a survey or anything like that, where you can put ideas out to the community and let them give you feedback, and that'll drive where we put attention to on the next iteration of where the company goes. So it was that was very much our strategy then. Of course, you kind of have to play then like that. Well, we got to make this a career at some point. It can't just be a hobby. So we eventually have to move towards it being something that actually scales and you can monetize, which we're getting towards there. Just, we knew that it was going to take time, and we wanted to see what the traction would be like early on. So it was crazy. Yeah. Kyle Sheldon, one of our partners, he put out a teaser tweet in like the middle of October. We had 1,500 people sign up on one day.
I was one of those. I saw Kyle's tweet. I was like, man, this sounds awesome. I mean, like, of course, you mentioned Teamwork Online, and who in this industry hasn't heard of them? But you're right. Like, you have to strongly filter things down. And I'll be honest, like, some months, depending on when you checked, like, they just didn't have quite as many soccer openings, or the soccer openings were all very, geared towards coaching, less towards business development, or things that are, any other, disciplines outside of that, right? So, but I'm really curious about just hearing you talk about how you scaled things up, and now hearing some of the mechanisms you use to build the following prior to the launch of Pathway. Is that why you opted for a newsletter as the medium choice, as opposed to, let's say, video content or anything else that strongly speaks to this generation?
Yeah, it was very much like we thought that, well, one, it's a medium that is in a lot of other industries, really well utilized, I think, to get content out. People like to read, probably more than you think. And we were also like, there's a lot of noise around video-based content that we were like, we don't really want to go down that route. And to some degree, I'm pretty comfortable with it, but I know Kyle is, but maybe Nolan, our other partner, not necessarily very comfortable being forward-facing and so in the social world. So
Sure.
we thought that actually, if we could really just interview a lot of people and get a lot of depth into those stories and just share career journeys, but then also take everything we've learned in our combined, I don't know, 30, 40 years of working in the industry and say, like, if I was going to do this, here's what I would do. Boom, boom, boom. Sort of create our pathway playbook, so to speak, of like, if I wanted to break into start a career in the industry, here's how I would go do it, right? And start to put that out there and see what kind of traction you get, right? And see what the feedback is. And then that was probably the best thing we could have done right away, was just add a lot of value to people. And we hear it every single day. We actually had a job, MLS marketing director, reach out to us and say that he had interviewed 4 to 6 people in his interview process that had referenced Pathway in their interview. And then the one that he actually hired had used our content as a tactical playbook to get the job. How amazing is that? And so it was crazy. It was awesome. I mean, that's like, it's total validation of like what it is that we're doing. And it really resonates with a lot of people. And so, eventually we want to tell those stories of how people got hired and things of that nature, but we're uncovering so much stuff by being just a part of it. And our whole goal is to help people and build that community up.
Yeah. And think about it, right? When you think about job seeking advice that most people get, it's not, in my opinion, super tactical, right? A lot of it's very high level. Some of it can be fluff. It's not totally specific to the role that you're applying for. There are just kind of these vague, general, like, tactics or ideas that you could potentially implement depending on what stage of the interview process you're at. But I think when I read Pathway, it's not just the stories that you tell from other stakeholders in the industry. It is very tactical knowledge that you can pick up and functionally use as you navigate the broader landscape. And that's, to me, it's like, for those who know me, they know I'm a big Alex Hermosi guy, I'm a big business development guy. And the guy, all of his content, right, is just kind of on that thread. It's like, take what I'm doing and just reskin it for whatever it is that you're doing. Yeah. You're probably going to be able to get somewhere. And that only comes from like being in the trenches and knowing what you're talking about because of where you've been, right? And so that's the value, I think, with Pathway, is just the combined experience you and Kyle really have. Man, I can't say enough good things about what you're doing. I do think there's an opportunity to, at some point, maybe scale into, not have it replace anything, but scale into another medium like video, depending on how you would want to present some of that content. I think there's just, another part of the broader fan base that you might be able to reach. But no matter what, I think you guys have done it the right way, and the lead magnets that you've used up to this point have been very, very effective. Before we wrap up, John, I'm really kind of curious. I do want to. We always kind of conclude the show in this kind of way, I will say, making big bets on where we think soccer is going to go in this country. We all want to see it grow. And I feel like I always ask some kind of variation of this question. Do you consider soccer to already be a top 2, top 3 sport as we continue to navigate through the most exciting time in our country's history to be a fan of the beautiful game? And if not, what's it going to take for us to get there?
I think if you look at it, the league is only so many years old, right? It started in 97, right? So it's still like in its infancy compared to a lot of leagues across the world, right? It's and the massive growth each time there's been an uptick in major tournaments in the United States that's held, it grows in popularity. And I think it's sort of a generational thing. I think you have a young group of kids that was impacted by it who are now adults now that are huge fans of the game. And then the fan culture that's surrounding like MLS right now and the way that's growing, and the kids that are growing up now and are experiencing that. Imagine when those kids are grown up and they're starting to move and they have children, like eventually it will become something much greater than what it is now. I think a lot of that has to do with the growth and explosion of MLS itself and the attention that's around that right now. It's obviously a very exciting time with big name players being here. Obviously we have the whole thing going down at Inter Miami. So it's a very exciting time. But I also think that like I'm looking at fan culture and I'm like, man, like look what St. Louis is doing. Man. I mean, they're one of the best fan experiences in the country. So imagine if you got to go as a kid growing up to that game every weekend and watch a game. I mean, it's amazing. Like Seattle, Portland. I mean, the list keeps going on. The attendance of the league keeps growing. So I think eventually it will become huge. And I still think there's a lot of growth potential on the women's side, actually, too.
Yeah.
And hopefully that will continue to go that way. But 2026, the World Cup will spurt another jump in, I think, youth participation in the sport. If we host the Women's World Cup after that, it'd be another jump in participation. So massive, massive market, I think, for growth in the sport.
Yeah, we're just getting started. I think the every year moving into the World Cup in 2026, there's something major going on, right? Copa America this summer, the FIFA Club World Cup in 2025, the World Cup in 2026, and like you said, potentially the Women's World Cup in 2027. I think it's if you're not paying attention to this game just yet in a massive way, this is probably your signal to start diving in. I think, and like John's journey has already proven, right? If you decide that this is a space you want to be in actively and make a full-time career out of, there is a million probably different ways to do it. You just have to get started. And now there is a resource that exists like Pathway to help you get started and hit the ground running. So John, your story, man, it's got me pumped. I'm getting ready to go work out after this. I think it's gonna be
there we go.
It's gonna be a good one, man. No, seriously, as a fellow entrepreneur, I can't do anything but tip my hat. I think there's a lot that our audience can unpack from this in terms of value, and a lot that they can tactically take with them as they continue to navigate what their own journey is going to look like. But before we go, I want to give you all the time you need to kind of give a shout out to whoever it may be, your co-founder, your project, anybody in between. Please feel free.
Yeah, no, I mean, I started a Pathway with Nolan Sheldon and Kyle Sheldon, both brothers. So check them out. Go follow them on LinkedIn, on Kyle on Twitter, probably specifically. You can go check him out. But you can follow our newsletter at pathwayhq.com. That's probably the best place to go and subscribe. Follow us on Twitter at pathway_HQ. Those would be the best places to just connect in with us. If you subscribe to the newsletter, we'll send you a little welcome email with some questions. Respond back to that. We respond to every email that we get. So we definitely want to connect with people. And I think that's the beauty of this whole thing is I've connected more with more people since we launched Pathway than I probably have in my whole career. So it's been amazing to do that. So I think I love that. I think reach out to us and we can get in touch.
Awesome. That's exciting. Again, wish you all the luck in the world with Pathway. I got a feeling that you guys are going to be, again, filling a need and a gap that none of us really foresaw in this industry that's growing and scaling very quickly. So big things ahead for Pathway, big things ahead for John Bello and his team. Again, John, thank you so much for setting aside time today. I appreciate it. And for anybody who's tuned in this far in the episode, we appreciate you. If you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and drop us a like and subscribe to the channel down below. Plenty more stories to make the beautiful game relevant to as many sports fans in North America as we possibly can. From everybody here at Box to Box and GOLZtv, my name's Jose. That's John. We'll catch you guys next time.